everybody. It's Heather with the Leadership the Heart podcast. And today I am thrilled. I have Dr. Chris Almeria on with me. And here's how I met him, actually. Well, somebody that I respect and have been connected to on LinkedIn for a very long time introduced us and thought that there was just so much in common as it relates to culture and leadership and showing care and uplifting people. And so as I heard more and more about Dr. Chris, I was like, yeah, we gotta make sure we get together. I want to make sure I have him on there. And of course, I learned that there was a background in the military and the Air Force, and one of my kiddos in there. So immediately I'm like, oh, my interest is piqued. So that's why you're on here. I get to chat with you.
Happy to be on here.
So let's talk about that. Where are you right now in your leadership journey?
So as I wrap up my 30-year career in the Air Force, I am at this point where my last official day on active duty isn't until later in the summer. So I have a lot of vacation days that I'm just burning through right now. Terminal leave, for those of you familiar with the military. And it's great. So I am searching for jobs in the private sector, trying to pivot into a learning and development or coaching type environment. And so right now I'm just sort of reflecting on all the things over my career, narrowed down to maybe my current assignment here at Shaw, here at South Carolina, talking to the people in the organization that used to be mine, that is no longer mine, like the team that I've helped put in place, making sure that they've got all the tools they need, fielding some phone calls, trying to provide background and context, but also trying to step away. There's a weird, in the military, there's this weird thing, like when you're no longer the person, whether it's the commander, whether it's the chief like I am, or the first sergeant, once you step away, once you hand that guide on, once you hand the government phone over, the ship's no longer yours. The organization's no longer yours. And so it's sort of a weird thing because I'm not moving, I'm not moving away completely, physically that is. You're always going to be interested in how your team is doing. But you have to have that, you have to have that internal fortitude or the humility to step back and go, okay, they've got it. And they're not going to do things the way that you would do them. I know when I took the seat, there was someone there who used to be in that same role. This person had retired and he worked in the same building as a civilian, as a government civilian employee. And so he was always very gracious. He never came in and said, man, you really messed that one up. Sometimes I would seek counsel, some advice, but it's always sort of this thing that I've learned. If you've done your job in the leader in the context of the Air Force, the organization is going to do well after you're gone. In fact, the real test is not when you're there. The real test is when you're not there. I've had the luxury of essentially kind of putting the pieces in place with people in the right positions over the last 2 years, like growing them, making sure that they were the right person for the role. And so now as that plan and sort of springs to action, I am now essentially the retiree who's just kind of sitting back like, okay, you know what, I think they've got everything they need. I think I've done all I can. And it's a good feeling. It's sort of like that proud, for, your kid going to school for the first day, you're like, all right, I'm at the bus stop. I can't get on with them. Have a good time. So just kind of going through those feelings right now, right? Like I think I've done all I can. And it isn't just this assignment. It's thinking back to all of the folks that I've helped. I've taken a lot of pleasure. A lot of my assignments, going all the way back to 2007, 2006. I'm kind of dating myself here. Being in the people development space in the context of the Air Force. So as a first sergeant for a long time, first sergeants have a motto in the Air Force, people are a business. We figured out institutionally a long time ago, if we take care of people, people take care of the mission. We ask people to do some very dangerous and very, very difficult things on a day-to-day basis. It looks routine, it's not. It looks simple, it's difficult, it's deadly, it's dangerous. And we figured out a long time ago, if we invest time in people, making sure that they're taken care of for, making sure their families are taken care for, and that's a huge piece of that, particularly in an overseas environment, because we have a lot of young people that come in the military. A lot of them will marry their high school sweethearts, so you've got 18, 19-year-old married couples and they're trying this thing out for the first time, away from home in another country. And that can get difficult, right? And so it's really hard to stay focused on the job. If your spouse or significant other is just like, I'm not liking place X, or I don't have any friends, or I lost my job. So making sure that we have avenues to address that, and we've gotten better at it over time since I've been in, because we've seen success with that. Like, we invest into the people side of that, the mission's gonna get taken care of. People don't join the Air Force because they don't want to not do the mission. It's sort of a tagline. You'll hear a lot of the official side of the Air Force say this, but it's absolutely true. We recruit airmen, we retain families. So people are not going to stay with us if they don't feel valued, if they don't feel fulfilled, if they don't feel like their concerns are being addressed. And while we can't fix everything, we are a government agency after all, we at least try. And sometimes this is the local level. Like, you know, I don't have the wherewithal, the remit of a representative or a 4-star general or the president or the secretary of defense, right? But I can control in my own little nexus in the squadron. And sometimes that's really all people need, to be heard, to be seen, like, hey, I'm going to address that. Maybe we can't fix that, but we can kind of push that up. And honestly, we're communicating your concerns, and that goes a long way. And really just kind of maybe taking the time to be present with people, to see that their concerns are being legitimately addressed, like they feel that you're genuine. That's sort of the space that I've been in, you know, since about 2006, and it's been absolutely wonderful. And I think a big part of my search right now is, I know that I'm probably not going to replicate that in the private sector, but what's going to get me close? What's going to get me in that learning and development? What's going to get me in that coaching space, to where I can do that? Having just finished a doctorate degree last year with Vanderbilt, I know that I want to teach, you know, maybe so like an adjunct professor thing on the side. If I could have my cake and eat it too, it's maybe a learning development in the private sector, but then also picking up a few classes like at a local college or something like that going forward, just to maybe kind of scratch that itch that I know that I'm going to have since I've been doing this kind of work for so long. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Wow. Well, that's great. And I can see why Leanne referred you over to me into the podcast, because in the end, everything you just said is exactly the stuff I've been writing about and talking about for years. So there's a lot of alignment there, and it's just in a different area, right? Yours is in the military side. And it's nice to hear that there are leaders like you in this space, like in the military side, being the caring leader, being that leader with heart, because we don't often, think about that. When we think of military leadership, we think of very, top down and very rigid and that kind of thing. And so as we hear some of the softness that you open up and reveal for us here, which sounds a little bit non-characteristic or uncharacteristic of the military, I think it's great. Like if this is kind of the new direction, if there are more people like you, and if you trained more people to lead this way, well, wow, like that's exciting.
It is. So it's definitely been an evolution, right? Like, not everyone in the Air Force is this way. Not everyone in the military is this way. But I would argue that we have seen over the last, just from what I've been in, so 30 years, the level of effectiveness, if you're relying on your position or your rank versus your actual ability to connect to people, it's different. I've had a lot of difficult conversations with people that I've mentored through the years. I'm not going to use their names. I can think of one person in particular. This would have been back in 2015 timeframe. New to the organization, new leader, just trying to still get the lay of the land, learning the particular airplanes that we had, learning the particular processes that we had. I come from a background in aircraft maintenance, and I always like to tell people that the airplanes get a vote. So yes, we want to fly X number of airplanes, X number of times a day, because we need to train pilots to get them, mission ready. However, the airplanes are not all brand new, and even the new ones have problems. So like any complicated piece of machinery, I may want it to be fixed and ready to go by X, by this particular hour. The airplane gets a vote, because sometimes the airplane's like, nah, bro, I'm still broke. You thought this part was going to fix it, it did not. Or you thought this particular troubleshooting was going to fix it, it did not. You get into a lot of art and science when it comes to troubleshooting airplanes. And so you do your best as a maintenance leader to forecast, okay, well, hey, this problem usually takes X hours to fix, so it should be ready by this particular scheduled time. So trying to explain all that to one of our new junior leaders, this person was still not necessarily understanding that, and had like a really negative reaction to just a couple of, we had a bad week. Things were not going well, parts were not coming in, airplanes are not ready on time. And so whenever you're not meeting your goals, right, there's always going to be pressure. And that's part of the job. That's fine. Arguably, that's no different than anywhere else. How you choose to react to that as a leader, though, is completely within your control. I've been yelled at by some of the best in the business, right? I expected it. It's fine, because that leader is expressing their frustration. But I have a choice on whether or not I am going to communicate that down to my team. I've worked for leaders who would just pass that down. You know, there's a saying about something that rolls downhill. Mm-hmm. I've seen that, and I've found that to be completely ineffective, because now I'm being yelled at for something that maybe I didn't have complete control over. So I've adopted a mindset of, I'm going to be the umbrella. So as that thing is rolling downhill, I'm the person with the shield, the Captain America shield. I'm the person with the umbrella, and make sure that I'm going to take the brunt. That's fine, right? I'm going to filter whatever was in that particular matter and communicate that to my team and say, hey, the boss is unhappy because of X, Y, and Z, and here's how we can get better for the next day. I tried explaining this philosophy to said person. This person was not having it. They were firmly in the, no, if I got yelled at, I'm just going to amplify the yelling. Right? You know, your traditional old school classic military approach. That's fine. And I remember having this conversation that I left this person with. So here's what's going to happen though. This is an all volunteer military, right? Like, this is not a conscript force. You know, people are going to remember, you know, what you said. More importantly, they're going to remember how you made them feel, right? So something didn't go wrong, and this is how you reacted, and this is how they feel. I need those people to be at their best tomorrow, and then the next day, and then the next day. And I'm also going to need them to be at their best on a Friday night, when I'm going to call them up at home and say, hey, guess what? There's a deployment going out, and you're the person who's going to be on it, right? So I'm going to ask them to do something difficult at some point. It's going to happen. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that we can be hugs and lattes and lollipops all the time, but there's a way to communicate bad news and not get them angry at you. In short, if I can inspire that kind of confidence, if I can get their enthusiasm, I'm going to get 200% out of them. If you're only looking for compliance, and by yelling and yelling more and then yelling a little bit louder, you're only ever going to get compliance. And basically at that point, you're reverting to your position, your rank. Okay, hey, look at this rank. You know, okay, yeah, got it. Compliance is law in the Air Force. If you don't comply, bad things happen like relatively quickly. And if you only ever get after compliance level leadership, you are not going to be effective. People are going to hate you. They're going to talk about you. Stories will be told, songs will be sung, and none of them are going to be pleasant. However, if you go after that level of enthusiasm, if you can get to that, that's going to make you effective. That's where you get the sum equals more than the parts. It's only at that level that happens. And that requires the active listening. That requires the attentiveness. That requires the communicating bad news in a way that you're not being a jerk. Basically, don't be a jerk. But that's hard, right? It's easy for me to say that because I've been doing this for quite some time, and I've been the jerk once. I'm like, okay, yeah, that didn't fit. That's not who I am. I've had other people be the jerk to me, and I certainly didn't like it. And I realized, I think early on, I can choose not to be a jerk. I can still get the message across. Hey, the boss is not happy. Yeah, we heard him yelling. Don't worry about that. Here's what the issue is. Let's see if we can fix the issue. And then the sun is going to come out tomorrow, and we're going to be fine. It takes practice, it takes practice doing that. As I tried to tell this person, I'm like, I'm coming at this at the benefit of several years, right? This is why, in particular for young officers, if you listen to your senior non-commissioned officers, we've been at this for a while. So think of us maybe as the older, wiser Jedi Council. You are the young Padawans. We know that you're the future. You will lead the Force one day. But you do need to listen to some of the ways that we failed in the past. Spending time being able to do that, that's probably like the best, that's probably been the best part of my job the last couple of years, because I've been able to kind of share those stories, those vignettes, and people like really connect to like, oh yeah. Again, it's not all rainbows and unicorns. Like you're never going to get 100% of what you want. Like again, we're a government agency. That's not what we do. You know, we're always never going to have the right amount of resources for what we're trying to get after. So you have to make trade-offs. Sometimes that means you can't go on that vacation. Sometimes it means you have to go here when you wanted to go there. And that's just a part of life, right? But you can do that in such a way that you're not being a jerk. And even inside the military, you get much, much better performance out of folks.
I love that. So I'm curious on have you share a time when maybe you weren't the best leader, or maybe where you weren't that leader who was like uplifting and knew the right things to say. And like you said, the leader who was the jerk. Tell us a story to the listeners about a time when maybe you were kind of a jerk about something, or your response, you know, and what did you do to come out of that?
I can think of probably a good example. So back when I was stationed in Washington State, McCord, Joint Base Lewis McCord. It's just outside of Tacoma, Washington. We're there for quite some time. Working on C-17, probably one of my favorite airplanes. At the time, I was the lead engine technician. So I was the guy people would come to with questions, with issues, because I am now, at this point in my career, I'm the lead technical expert for this engine. It's probably one of my favorite roles, because I was still hands on the airplane, but also picking up some administrative responsibilities. So sort of like my first foray into management, versus just being a tactical team leader, if you will. So kind of wearing both hats at the same time. We do a lot of what we call dual hatting in the military, which is, you know, hey, I need you to do X, Y, and Z, but you only get one salary, but that's fine. It's a learning experience, and you grow out of it. I can remember a phone call that I got. This was late one evening, where we had a particular engine issue. It was, like I was saying before, the airplane gets a vote. The airplane was voting against us all day long, right? So we thought the problem was narrowed down to this particular component. I gave turnover to the swing shift, so I was a day shift guy. All right, hey team, this is what we're doing. This is what we've figured out. We've troubleshot the problem down to this part. So I need you to just go after this part. Okay. They spend the next 8 hours, from about 3 to about 11, not doing what we had asked, right? So that was a little frustrating for me. I get a call, it's probably 11:30, 12. So now mid-shift is coming on. Mid-shift decides that they're going to go in a completely different direction. They're like, those guys on day shift, they don't know what they're talking about. Guys in swing shift don't know what they're talking about. So we're going to go in a completely new direction. And I get a phone call from one of the maintenance leaders who's there, who's the production supervisor, trying to, you know, harness the effort, try to make sure we're going. He's like, hey, I'm getting some feedback from one of your guys, and it's late at night, right? And I just remember getting this phone call, and I was incensed, right? And so I'm like, put that choice word on the phone, right? So said person gets on the phone, and I just start berating him over the phone. Like, I'm standing in my house and I'm yelling at the top of my lungs. Kids are waking up, you know, wife's like, what's wrong? And I'm just going off on this guy. I'm like, blah, 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 classic, like, I've forgotten more about this airplane than you'll ever know type stuff. Just completely not in the right headspace to just, just yelling at this guy completely. Like, he can't even get a word in because I'm just on full blast, right? It isn't until the production supervisor gets the phone, he's like, Chris, calm down. And he was very good at what he did. Senior maintenance leader, he'd been doing this for quite some time. He changed his tax on me. He's like, Chris, are the Yankees doing, right? So I'm a huge New York Yankee fan. I'm from New York. And that's like, that was an easy way for me to get like, oh, huh, what? He completely calms me down out of the situation. You know, I wake up the next morning, still kind of angry, right? Going to, storming to work. It wasn't for about like a day and a half until I actually had a face-to-face meeting with the person that I yelled at. And I think in that time, because our first interaction was not good, after that, and I think after that, I had gotten some direct feedback, like, that's not how we do things here. You don't come across to people like that, because now this person is essentially not going to do anything. You're like, well, what's day shift want me to do? I'm just going to sit here and do this. It took a while. Like, if I'm being honest, it probably took me a good week and a half to like get it through my noggin. Like, maybe that was not the right response. Maybe it's okay to feel that way, but it's not okay to actually have that just come out direct blast. That was probably one. I had another one. I was actually sharing this with someone a couple weeks ago. This was fast forward. So now I'm in the people carrying development solely job, my first sergeant role. I'm at NATO headquarters. I've got a senior person who's been in the Air Force for 18, 19 years, and they are struggling with their PT test. And so we're trying to talk to this person. We're trying to lay out a program. Like, at the time, actually, it's still the rule now. If you have a consecutive number of PT tests, you're looking at a career-ending event. So if you fail 4 tests within a 24-month period, and there are no medical issues, your career could be over, right? Because there is a need to keep fit. This person, in my estimation, was not taking fitness seriously. They had failed 2 tests successively. So failed the first test, they retested like 90 days later, they failed that test. And then just kind of looking at the score, it looks, their performance was actually rolling backwards. So, I sit them down, I'm like, what is going on with you? Like, you have failed 2 tests. You are halfway to the point where your career might be over, right? Like, you don't get to retire, like, you're done. Like, and that would be a horrible way to end a journey, because you can't get around the track fast enough. So like, what's going on? And this person, he's like, yeah, okay, blah, blah, blah. He comes in a week later saying, I passed the test, which was pretty suspect because he wasn't scheduled for another like 30 or 35 days. Come to find out, he had coerced someone into forging some paperwork, and then kind of tried to present this as an official test, which, by the way, is all kinds of bad, and that there's specific charges in the military that you absolutely cannot do that. So I caught wind of this because he's at the front, he's in like the outer office, and another person comes back to me, he's like, hey, Shirt, were you tracking this? And I'm like, no, this is pretty suspect. The person who tested him comes back, and I kind of look him in the eye, I'm like, tell me what's going on here. And he doesn't make eye contact. And that's like my spidey sense at that point is like, okay, I think I know what's going on here. I start talking to him, and then said individual makes his way back to my office and starts to like, he stands in my doorway and does this. And so then we get into a screaming match. Like, so he's talking to me, I'm talking to him, he's raising his voice, I'm raising my voice back. And so we're not de-escalating, we're escalating to a point where we're both shouting at each other. Right next door to me is my boss, the commander. And I'm at a point where I'm like, again, some choice words are being said. I think I'm like hitting the wall like this. And my commander just shows up and then kind of escorts the individual away. Talk to my boss, afterwards. I'm like, yeah, I think I lost my temper there. Because this was just an affront to integrity. This was an affront to someone who's senior enough in rank to know better. And that kind of hit my buttons faster than like literally anything else. Again, I'm from New York. Like, there's a lot of things you could say to me. It's not even gonna penetrate the shield. Like, okay, that's all you got. But for a senior person in the organization to display such a wanton lack of integrity, like that went straight through to my feels, and I wasn't having it. Again, not the right response. Escalating is not usually what you're not going to get a good result out of that. And so sharing that lesson with someone, you know, and in the future, because I've had a lot of instances where emotions have run high. As part of that job, you will get a lot of phone calls because a couple will be arguing, so a domestic situation. And you're part of the command team that's going to respond. So first responders will go first, obviously. They'll get the situation calmed down, but while they're there, you're getting a phone call. So then you're going out. And I've probably lost count to the number of domestic situations that I've responded to. None of them are ever any good. They're always filled with a lot of emotion. There's always a lot of angst. There's always a lot of just a lot of things that you're trying to get through. And so you're there to be the fair arbiter. You're not there to pick a side. You're there to calm the situation down, to get the parties back to where they can, you know, talk in a respectful manner afterwards. And I never had a problem kind of keeping my cool in those scenarios, which is kind of odd. You know, the best way I could describe it, I'm like, in that role, you're not taking sides. So you'll have, you know, your active duty member, a dependent spouse, or sometimes another active duty member. Sometimes it's the same unit, sometimes it's different units. You're there to just kind of calm the situation down. So you're the UN peacekeeper, blue helmet, white vest. You know, I'm not here to pick sides. I'm just here to keep people from hurting each other, right? Like, so, and someone is going to go somewhere else, because usually if I'm responding, I'm not leaving so that you all can stay in the same house, apartment, hotel room, whatever. One of you's coming with me. And we do that because we're into experience. If we can do this, it'll cost us a hotel room, and that's usually a lot cheaper than how some of these things can play out. And I've always been able to kind of keep my calm in those situations. And I've seen a lot of wacky stuff in that. Probably the worst part of the job, in a sense that you're seeing people at their worst, at their most emotional, raw states. But being able to keep calm there, I think, you know, I got better at it at a time, like, because we're not robots, right? You're going to hear things, you're going to go, but you're trying to maintain okay, why don't we just discuss this at another time? So I think leveraging on that and kind of, okay, what allowed me to keep calm with that, but yet when I'm faced with this, like, that hit my buttons. So I think having that experience helped me just graduate, if you will, to the not being a jerk, not yelling at people. Even if people are yelling at you, like, okay, that's fine. How I choose to react is either going to feed that or it's going to de-escalate it. And it takes a lot. It's not easy. There is a lot of just, like, sometimes you can feel the weight, like, especially, like, you know, you're trying to diffuse the situation. You're trying to just, okay, I'm not going to be the person who feeds into this, but you're just quiet and you're just taking this abuse. You're just, you know, again, if you look at sports analogies, umpires and referees in the major leagues, whether it's the NFL or the MLB. MLB is my favorite because you'll see players or managers just going full throttle at an umpire, and the umpire's just kind of doing this. Like, I know the headspace that umpire is in because I've been that person before, right? Not necessarily calling balls and strikes on a situation, but, you know, people are just angry with you, and you're just trying to be like, okay. You're not going to get there. Like, most people don't get there overnight. I mean, it took me a couple of, like, okay, I did that wrong. I got some feedback on how I did that wrong. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that wrong again, because I know that situation is going to come around again. It will always come around again, whether it's at work, whether it's at home, whether it's with your partner, whether it's with a colleague. There's going to be disagreement because we're human. There's going to be, especially in a work context, there's going to be pride involved because maybe team X wants to take the lead on something, but team Y is the one that's going to do it. Feelings are going to be hurt. Egos are going to be dented. And so trying to be the person that's like, even when it's my own, like, okay, you know what? we've lost that. I gotta take that and move on. I can commiserate about it later. But here and now and really going forward, it's not going to matter. So why react and be the jerk?
Yeah, exactly. It makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious to, this is the time of the podcast where I have you ask if there's something a question you have of me, anything that you have that you'd like to ask me specifically that I'll answer. So it's kind of like you're the podcast host now. What might be a question you have that you'd ask of me?
I was trying to catch part of your TED talk. Leanne had sent me the link, and I was very kind of inspired by your story about how you grew up and you had one side of your family that kind of was like, nah, we can't do that. I come from a biracial family myself, so I know some of what you speak. I didn't experience that dynamic in the same way. Mine was always with friend groups in high school. It was always kind of interesting being the kid in the middle. Like, are you supposed to be over there? Or are you supposed to be over there? Why can't I just be where I'm at? Why do I have to pick a side? I guess my question to you then is, if you had to do it over again, what would you change, if anything, if you had the power to do so?
I would say I would have forgiven myself before I forgave my grandmother. Like I would have like given my own self grace, or like, just not been as hard as I have been on myself in the journey that I was on her. Because what I did is I kind of early on justified the actions. It was the only way I could kind of cope and still have the relationship I wanted with her. So I would just, justify that. But then, as that story talks about, as I talk about, often it's like, well, there's those senses of like not being good enough, not being worthy, and so having that be such a hard message in your head at a very young age all the way through, I wish I would have had foresight to say, it has nothing to do with you. Like in the end, this has nothing to do with you, but as your kid, it's hard to really see that. It's hard to see past that. You're feeling very hurt and you feel like it's absolutely about you in the minute. But I wish I would have been able to see that it's completely them, not me, earlier than like in my late 30s or whatever, when I'm, going to that funeral, sitting here going, do I have a right to go to this funeral? Like when I'm at that place doing that. So I would say that'd be it. That it would just be like, give myself more grace, forgive myself earlier, like realize the worth that was there earlier on would probably be the thing I wish that was in place. Didn't have to take as long, and still something that I struggle with. I think we talk about not being perfect in things we do. And I would say that's kind of the key is, this whole like life journey thing. Oh my gosh, doesn't it have lots of ups and downs and emotions to it?
Yes. Yes.
So just getting to the point where it's like, okay, Heather, you got it. So yeah, but that'd be it. That would be it. That's a good question.
Yeah, it's so it's again, that resonates with me on a number of different levels, right? So my wife is Okinawa. We've been married for 20. I should know this a lot faster. Wow. We're going on 27 years. When we first met, my existence was a secret to her family, because Okinawa has a very special / troubled history in the context of World War II. Long story short, it was essentially sacrificed by the Imperial Japanese Army and mainland Japan, because it was the first. Actually, Iwo Jima was the first, but Okinawa was the first. So after Iwo Jima, you have American ground forces landing on Japanese territory. The fighting at Iwo Jima was fierce. It's the stuff of legend. It's the statue that is in Washington, D.C. with the Marines holding up the flag. That's Iwo Jima. Okinawa was worse. Okinawa was bloodier. It was deadlier. Caught in the crossfire. And what makes Okinawa worse is caught in the crossfire is civilians, Okinawan civilians. They're not fully Japanese. They were their own independent kingdom, but they were sort of under the thumb. So they didn't belong to anyone. They were just kind of trying to be their own selves, like live their own peaceful lives, but they occupy a strategically important position on the map. They still do. And so as a result of that, forces come to them. So they were caught in between. They were fed a lot of propaganda before the American forces arrived, like they're devils, you're going to eat your babies, they're the worst people in the world, which of course isn't true. And so it just sort of set from the beginning A lot of distrust, a lot of angst. We still have a very large military presence there, owing to its strategic position. That large presence causes its own problems because there's a lot of petty issues that not petty issues. There are a lot of issues that come up, and it's sort of been this long running storyline. Like they don't belong to the mainland Japanese, they don't belong to America. They're just sort of like in the middle. And so for an Okinawan girl to date an American, that doesn't always go over well. It's okay with some, it's not okay with all, right? And so my bride, it was not okay with her family, and that was an interesting dynamic. Yet at the same time, growing up the way I did, I'm like, this is exactly what I went through, only it's in a different language. Mm-hmm. I'm like, so in America, it's skin color. Here, it's arguably it's skin color, but it's nationality. I'm like, but it's sort of the same thing. It's sort of like looking at like the way that I grew up as a kid, but the Asian version. So it's like subtitled in a different language.
Oh,
so
wow.
I kind of find that fascinating. Fast forward to our time in Belgium at NATO headquarters, and probably one of our best assignments. You've got NATO headquarters in Brussels. You have NATO's Pentagon, if you will, down in Mons. Belgium is split into a French-speaking side, Wallonia, and a Dutch-speaking side, Flanders. There's also like a little Brussels, like you've got like kind of like a mix, and there's like a little carve out for German speakers. But there is a huge divide between French speakers and Flemish speakers, to the point where there were areas, and I remember when I got there, I was reading stories about there were Belgian landlords who would not rent to people with French names, and French landlords who would not rent to people with Dutch names, because there's some unresolved conflict. And yet again, I'm like, wow, this is just like growing up, only instead of race, now we're arguing over language and like historical ties. So it's like, it's interesting to see that same pattern of exclusion based on, pick a thing, in different contexts. Like people were fascinated with it. I'm like, I feel like I've seen this before. Oh yeah, I have seen this before in a couple of different areas. It's strange how sometimes when you recognize that pattern, how you start to see it in a lot of other places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is interesting. Well, I am curious. So for those who are listening right now, as we kind of boil down the episode, what might be like one pearl of wisdom, just one that you would leave them with to kind of maybe inspire them towards more leadership with heart, caring leadership? What might be the pearl of wisdom you leave them with?
Be present for your people. That is not easy to do. It's easy to say, it's not always easy to do. I think all too often we're very good to do the perfunctory, hey, how you doing? With no real intention to actually get to the bottom of, hey, how you're doing. We recently did some training, our organization did some training, the name escapes me now, wow. The Arbinger Institute, sorry. Arbinger has a great program. You can kind of summarize it with being present for people, right? Like being present in your leadership. There's trying not to use the proprietary words here, since I'm not one of their licensed folks. That being said, one of the things that we took time to do, like my boss took time to do, is sitting down, just carving out time in the calendar to learn about this particular person. The expectation is, if the boss could do it, if the boss could find time in her schedule to do it, I could find time in my schedule to do it, and so on and so forth down the organization. Basically, what we're trying to get after is, if we understand what makes people tick, and this would only cost you an hour of your time, doesn't cost money. You can follow a format, you can do it free flow, but sometimes it's helpful to go, tell me what your interests are, tell me where you want to be in 5 years, tell me some of your stressors. You're not there to fix anything. You're not there to offer like, oh, well, I have this suitcase of $10 million, so here you go. It's not that. It's, if I know how you are, if I know what makes you tick, if I know your stressors as a leader, I'm going to be able to spot when you're off. It might be the way you present in the morning. It might be the way you look. And if I know that, I can pull you aside. I can have a quick 5, 10, 15, 20, 25-minute conversation. And then maybe that's all you need. Maybe that's the gateway to getting the help that that person needs. Maybe that's a way to unlock some ideas to come at a problem differently. And all it is an investment in time. You don't need to commission a new program. You don't even need to make a new room. You can have, ideally, you want to do this in a somewhat private setting. But if you just do that, if you just invest a little bit of time in your people, find out strengths, weaknesses, ask for feedback. I'm getting ready to leave. My boss is getting ready to leave. She reached out to a group of us and said, hey, I'm getting ready to leave, but I want to know where I can do better. And I want you to give me some honest 360-degree feedback, right? And I absolutely love that. So I guess be present for your people. And that pearl is now subdivided into another pearl. The other one is, do not be afraid to be vulnerable for feedback. None of us get this right 100% of the time, first time out of the chute. In fact, you only are ever going to learn when you run up against a guardrail, when you do something a little bit wrong, and then you're humble enough to accept the feedback, like, you know what, maybe I did do that wrong. Maybe I could have done that better, because that's going to prevent you from making the same mistake twice. Going back to the aircraft maintenance world, we have a long list of technical manuals. It specifies how you fix an airplane. You know, for pilots, it specifies how you operate an airplane. Inside those manuals, notes, cautions, and warnings. All of those are there because someone has done something wrong once upon a time. We like to say they're written in blood because sometimes it's a fatal accident. Sometimes it's you lose a hand or a finger. But you pay attention, we capture what went wrong, and we publicize it so we don't do it again. So we're good at that on a technical side. We're not always good at that at the people side. And I think it just starts with being vulnerable to feedback and then just being present for your people so they feel comfortable coming to you with those kinds of questions.
I love that. I love that, Dr. Chris. Okay, so for those who are listening, if you got like just as much oomph in the conversation I've had here today, please do share this far and wide on where to your entire audience, to everybody, whoever's around you, whoever's in your circle, share it, because that's how they get to learning more of these different tips about leadership and carrying leadership specifically. And then also don't forget to go to Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen and make sure you write that 5-star review, because that's another way the algorithm picks up and makes sure that we kind of start to move more and more to the top so that managers and leaders can hear this. So, so for those who are listening, thank you. And Dr. Chris, this has been awesome. Thank you so much.
Heather, this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today.
And thanks everybody for listening to the Leadership with Heart podcast. Be well.